Good evening. My name is Michael Wong. I'm the Vice President of Veterans for Peace, and I'm here with George Koo. Let me just introduce him. George Koo retired from a global advisory services firm where he advised clients on their China strategies and business operations. Educated at MIT, Stevens Institute, and Santa Clara University, he's the founder and former managing director of International Strategic Alliances. He's currently a board member of Freschfield's, a novel green building platform, and he's somebody that's well known in the Chinese community and has a good reputation both in the business world and in the Chinese community. George, welcome to our program.
Hey, thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be with you.
George has recently written an article in Asia Times, which is a very prominent English language news agency on news of Asia. That article is entitled Biden's Contrasting Styles and Priorities. And I'll put a screenshot of that here. This is the article. And if you take a look at it, it's gotten quite a bit of coverage, and I'd like to invite George to talk about it. George, would you go ahead and just kind of summarize this article for us?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Michael. Well, that article was written in June, so besides summarizing, I may want to do a little updating because some things have happened between June and end of August. What my point of that article was that the Biden White House, so far as the China policy is concerned, has really bamboozled the American public. They're presenting the China policy as if this is the winning way to go, overlooking all the harm and damage it's doing to American interests, to American security, as a matter of fact. And I welcome this opportunity to expose some of the fallacies that that we're facing right now because of Biden's administration's China policy. So let me make a few points before then we can have a discussion. First of all, when Biden got elected, most of us really expected that he would reverse and cancel the policies toward China that Trump set up that made absolutely no sense. But to our collective disappointment, Biden didn't do any of that. He continued it and made it worse. The summation of the positions by Blinken and Yellen and all the cabinet officers the position is, hey, we want to work with China, but on our terms, which means China has to do this, China has to do that in order to collaborate with us. Otherwise, nothing doing. And you know this and you see this. For example, when Biden met Xi Jinping at Bali last year, he was skip stepping towards Xi Jinping, big bear hug, all smiles, and promised to support one China policy, but Taiwan is part of China. All the goodwill and good promises. And then what did he do? As soon as he came back to Washington, he imposed sanctions on the technology export to China and sent arms to Taiwan. He basically reneged everything that he said. And this is the way Blinken behaved as well. Janet Yellen went to Beijing to ask for the support of the dollar. As soon as she leaves Beijing, she goes to Africa and say to the African countries, say, you got to watch out for China because those are debt traps in the making. there's no sincerity or any well intentions in what Biden has been doing in terms of China. But they have convinced the Western media to go along with this anti-China message, so that everything that's coming out of Western media, from New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, just about anything and everything is negative about China. Some of it may be based on a certain amount of facts, a lot of it exaggeration, even fabrication and made up stories. And why are they doing that? It's just to demonize China, to justify all the hostile acts and actions that we are doing to China. And anytime China reacts to our hostile intentions, we use it the media uses it to point out, see, China is the bad actor, like we've been saying all along. But let me summarize some of the damages the Biden White House has done that the American public may not be aware of. First of all, Biden has weaponized the dollar because of the Ukraine war, because of the sanction imposed on Russia, to the point that, you know, if you're not friendly to U.S. and you're not following the U.S. lead, you could lose all your U.S. assets in a moment just like that. And this is what Biden did to Russia. As a result of that weaponizing of the dollar, Biden has destroyed the credibility of the dollar in the eyes of the whole world. So this is why a consequence of that is now we have the BRICS nations expanding its membership. Countries are piling in to be a member of BRICS. Why is that? Because that's one way to get out from under the hegemonic policies, the my way or the highway attitude of the US. And this is a totally self-imposed destruction that the Biden has created. In point of fact, the world trade that's going on is getting away from paying from dollars, because the de-dollarization is exactly a counter move to the weaponizing of the dollar. So what else is happening? Well, Saudi Arabia now has become a very friendly nation to China, selling oil in renminbi, agreed to remove the petrodollar as a currency of exchange. This too is caused by the U.S. unilateral actions. We have another example of hypocrisy. We have the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, insisting that he needs to have a dialogue with the Minister of Defense, Minister Lee, to provide security so that there wouldn't be any misunderstanding. And he laments that the defense minister refuses to talk to him. Well, that is really a such a crock, if you pardon the expression, because they have Lee under a sanction that was imposed during Trump years. He is under a personal sanction. And what did he do? He bought fighter jets from Russia, and that's considered a no-no by Trump. And that's why they put him in the personal sanction. Well, he was buying these jets as the officer in charge of procurement for China. So he was not doing it as a personal action. He was doing it as part of his job. And now, as Minister of Defense, Austin cannot even remove that sanction as a gesture of goodwill, of sincerity. Well, how do you expect a minister of defense that's under U.S. sanction to be willing to cooperate and to talk to Austin? Second point, how do you expect China to act in terms of non-aggression, in terms of peaceful cooperation, if you're the ones that are cruising ships right off the shore of China, you're flying all the surveillance planes off the coast of China. If you are truly interested in security and no accidental misunderstandings that leads to conflict, it's very simple. All you have to do is stop cruising in the South China Sea and stop flying the planes off the coast of China. It's all of the provocations are coming from the U.S. side, and somehow or other we are succeeding in convincing the American public that the enemy is China and China is the provocateur. But China isn't doing any of the provocations. So that was pretty much the highlight, if you will, of the article I wrote. Now, one interesting development that's happening as we speak right now, Michael, is that Secretary of Commerce Raimondo is in China to discuss cooperation. The difference between Raimondo in China and all the other cabinet officers that's been to China is that in this case, she was actually invited by the Minister of Commerce. So at least in this case, there's an indication that China is willing to talk. Now, whether Raimondo will bring certain gestures of goodwill with her or not remains to be seen. If she goes in and has the same attitude that, hey, we're going to keep the tariffs on the Chinese imports, we're going to continue the semiconductor sanctions and embargo to China, all the hostile actions, then there's nothing positive is going to come out of this meeting. So that's pretty much where we are today between U.S. and China.
Yeah, there was a lot of good points that you made in the article. I mean, in addition to the Chinese buying from Russia, India and Turkey were buying from Russia, but yet there were no consequences for that. That was considered acceptable. And I noticed since the article came out, 6 more nations have joined BRICS, which means that, like you said, they're moving away from the United States. They're moving closer, not only to China, but to all these other countries, Russia, and so on that are involved. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Argentina, very diverse countries are joining BRICS.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments on that? Some of the events that have happened since you wrote the article?
Yeah, I think the significant additions so far is Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran. They're all oil producing countries. And the fact that they're motivated to join because they can see as BRICS increases the membership, their purchasing power will increase. In fact, already the population and GDP of BRICS exceeds that of G7. So they're already a bigger market. And by the oil countries, joining BRICS, it's an all-around win-win. It's good for the other members and it's good for the new members that join. And the 6 countries you mentioned, Mike, which is, I think, Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, this is just the beginning. Because I think many other countries, as many as 30 others, participated at the South African meeting. expressed interest in joining. One of them that will be big will be Indonesia, because they're one of the biggest countries, biggest economies. Plus, they have a lot of mineral resources that's important to the global economy. What we can't say, because we don't quite really understand what's the vetting process and how do countries get admitted to BRICS, we can't predict when the rest of them will be added. But you can be sure step by step, more and more other countries that will be joining BRICS, and they're all motivated to get out from under the American influence and the hegemony of the US dollar. Now, you mentioned Russia and the fact that they sell oil to India and to China and to other countries brings up a very excellent point on why the sanction on Russia backfired. Because what Biden did was to say to Russia, we're not going to give you any of the dollar deposits that you have in the American accounts in the U.S., held in the U.S. banks. We're just going to confiscate it or at least freeze it. And we're going to freeze the same assets for your to your buddies, Putin's friends and others of the Russian oligarchs. Well, guess what? The ruble took a big tumble but bounced right back up. Why did it bounce right back up? Because the Russian economy has lots of natural resources they can sell to the world. They have oil and gas, which originally they were selling directly to Europe, but thanks to the Nord Stream pipeline explosion, they're not selling to directly to Europe. They sell to India, and India resells it to the Western European countries, and the Western European country gets Russian gas and oil at about pay 3 times more than what they would have gotten if they bought directly, and that's thanks to the U.S. sanction and U.S. policies. But because Russia has fertilizers, they have agricultural products like wheat and other things that they can sell. Their economy did not take a hit from the sanction. They're getting paid in rubles, and the ruble's value has gone back up because it's backed by real assets, not backed by the printing press that our dollar is based on. And that's another fallacy that the American public needs to understand. We're the one that is skating on thin ice because our dollar is dependent on the printing press and quote unquote the full faith and credit of the American Federal Reserve. At this point, a lot of countries are wondering what that's worth.
Those are really good points. And, I know that a lot of countries have been talking about the fact that the American government is sanctioning so many countries. In a way, it's unpredictable who the American government is going to sanction next and why, because it doesn't matter whether you're a small country like Venezuela or Nicaragua, whether you're a large country like Russia, whether you're a medium-sized country like Iran. If the United States decides for whatever reason that they don't like you,
they
they're sanction you.
First threaten you, and then they sanction you.
Yes. And by doing this to so many countries around the world, which are totally different from each other and have, in many ways, completely different histories, cultures, everything, the America is threatening everybody. And by threatening everybody, what you're doing is you're pushing everybody together against us. We're isolating ourselves, actually, rather than isolating other countries.
Yeah. And the other point, Michael, is that because you're so used to using the sanction as a weapon, it actually loses its effectiveness. After a while, countries like Cuba, for example, has learned to live with sanctions for a long, long time. Iran has learned to live with sanctions. And as I said, Russia has done very well despite sanctions. So it's losing its clout as we speak, but it's not a way to influence people and make friends. And what does the U.S. have in terms of, that's a stick. Where's the carrot? Well, the only carrot that U.S. seems to have when they offer is the quote unquote security blanket. We promise you security. We will come and protect you. Our missiles and our ships and our fighter planes will protect you. And some of the countries fall for this. Australia is one of them. Japan is one. South Korea maybe is one of these. They seem to think American promises of security is worth something. Okay. But a lot of countries are not convinced. France is not convinced. Germany is very doubtful. Many of the Western European countries are not so sure that being under the US military umbrella is necessarily such a good thing. Yeah. That's all they seem to have. Whereas the rest of the world, when they see China, they don't see hegemony. They don't see my way or the highway. They see China willing to work with everyone on a mutually beneficial basis. And that's the basis for the Silk and Road Initiative, or we call it Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. And over 150 countries are working with China on Belt and Road. So I think it's important we summarize what Belt and Road is for the American public, because a lot of people don't know. They all think that this is just a debt trap. What China has done, because they invested so heavily from the 2008 financial crisis, instead of quantitative easing, which is what the U.S. did to bail itself out, again, by printing a lot of money to bail us out. What China did was to invest in infrastructure. They built high-speed rail. They learned to build highways, bridges, tunnels, ports, port containing equipment. And all of that, they learned from that experience. In fact, the construction engineering techniques that they have picked up, it's blown the world's mind. They can put up a building 12-story high in a few days, for example. It's all with very advanced technique. They can lay down a rail at an amazing speed. I don't remember the exact figure, but it's so many miles per day, and it's all on automated equipment. So now they've taken that expertise and they've taken it to the world, and they basically say to different countries, if they want us to help, we'll come and we'll build the highway for you, we'll build the ports for you. These are the Belt and Road Initiative. Why is China doing that? Well, it's not free aid. It's financed so that there is a return on investment from the Chinese part. But more importantly, the Chinese logic is by helping you with the infrastructure, your economy, your national economy will improve. And by your economy improve, you will be able to participate in the global trade, which China, is the most active, most important trading nation. So it's a mutual win. It benefits everybody. And that's why it's such a popular idea and concept. And every so often you hear about a project that didn't work out financially or for whatever reason. Well, those things happens, but they are then renegotiated and they work out the terms. But you should see most of the countries are just absolutely delighted with what's happening. In Indonesia, they have a high-speed rail, which is the one part, and it will be extended. In Kenya, you have Mombasa to Nairobi, which everybody that's written on has been raving about it. Laos was heretofore a landlocked country with no exit, no way to export their goods. China built a rail from Vientiane to Yunnan in China, and that links Laos export all the way to Central Asia and to Europe. These are lifelines to these countries, and China invested and built and helped them with all these projects. So I think it's important for the American public to understand China's action is not meant to be hostile to the US. China's action is to help the world to lift all boats, to increase the global economy. And there's nothing that says US could not be part of it. All US has to do is recognize that trying to suppress China's development is going to work against US own interest. Give you some negative blowbacks. It's happening already. Our members of Congress spend so much time and energy suppressing China. They're not doing anything to help the American infrastructure. Nothing is getting done on that American infrastructure. The money that they have allocated has not helped build, repair any bridges, build any high-speed rail, or any highways. None. The perception. I'm drawing all of a sudden. I'm drawing a blank on where I was going. But the other thing is the anti-Asian, anti-Chinese attitude has actually physically harmed the U.S. As I think Cyrus Jensen said recently in his video cast, that 20,000 Chinese scientists are leaving the U.S. and going somewhere else. Most of them are going back to China. These are some of the leading edge, make key contributions in the U.S., but they can't tolerate the hate and suspicion and fear that they're experiencing in the U.S. And this is a directly consequence of what Washington and Biden administration has done, has brought the poison to the Chinese American community. In the long run, that is going to hurt us here in the U.S.
That's a really good point. I remember Hillary Clinton said something which has become a famous quote of hers. At one point, she said, "I don't want my grandchildren to grow up in a world dominated by the Chinese." And I think that's representative of a lot of people in the American establishment, particularly at the very top in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
They have this fear that China is going to dominate the world in the same way that the United States has been dominating the world.
Yeah.
And they don't understand Chinese history. If you look back at Chinese history, China was always a large nation, very advanced, just as it is now. But they were always a regional power. They never strived to become a global power.
Right.
Even back 1,000 years ago, when the Chinese invented gunpowder and had a monopoly on it for 400 years before anybody else invented it, they had a large civilization, good natural resources, a large population, and a monopoly on gunpowder for 400 years, and they never went out and tried to conquer the world. Their strategy was, secure your own borders, secure your own position, trade with the world through the Silk Road, which they did for thousands of years, and mutually profit through trade through the Silk Road. And what they're doing now is recreating that same strategy. The Belt and Road is the new Silk Road.
Yeah.
But there's this paranoia and racism. Could you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
how you see that?
Well, the it's a transposition of our Western idea into the Chinese mindset. There's no basis for saying this, but because we, the Western white world, is so used to being the aggressor, to colonize, to take advantage of the indigenous people, to exploit them, and to pillage their resources. We get into the habit of thinking everybody else must think the same way and do the same thing. But you were right. The Chinese civilization has a long history, and it's not only because they have the offensive capability of the gunpowder. Their mindset, their attitude has never been, let's go invade somebody. In fact, they're actually not very good fighters. I mean, the Mongols and the Manchus, all the nomadic tribes, they're constantly coming down from the north and trying to steal and pillage from the Chinese civilization. And the Chinese, all that they spend their time on was to defend against the invaders. And you probably heard of Zheng He, the admiral that sailed the seven seas long before Columbus discovered America. The Chinese were sending ships all over, but they didn't invade any of these countries. They invited some of the leaders, some of the princes, local princes from Java, for example, to get on the ship and visit Beijing, to pay their respect and tribute to the emperor of the Ming Dynasty, and they go home with much more goods and precious things than was part of the tribute. Zheng He was in Africa before Vasco da Gama came around the other way. What did he do? He brought a couple of giraffes back to show the emperor some of the strange animals that existed in Africa. Zheng He had, I think, on the west coast of India, there's a I forgot the name of the city, slips my mind right now, but they taught the local in Kerala. Cochin is the name of the city. They taught the people there the way the Chinese ship using fish using nets that you drop down into, and that still exists today. The Chinese influence is through their culture, but not through aggression, not through occupation, and that's always been the case.
Yeah, I think I forget who it was that pointed out that the Chinese built the Great Wall to keep invaders out, not to invade other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look back at Western history, it's always been Western Europe has always been a place of a lot of small countries fighting with each other, trying to conquer or dominate each other. And so that's their history, and that's the culture that they've developed and that they've learned, and they project that mindset and those beliefs onto other people. The Chinese officials keep saying, "Life is not a zero-sum game. It's not a zero-sum game."
Yeah.
And the Americans can't get that through their heads. Their view is either you are the conqueror or you are the victim. Those are the only two choices. They can't seem to wrap their minds around the idea that there could be a third alternative.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, we can't blame all this on American history, because really the American history, they inherited the whole attitude from the Brits. And if you look at the way the Europeans treat Africa, it was every country went down there to grab what they can. The French did that, the Brits did that, the Belgium did that. Italians had their share. Maybe Germany missed out because they were not a unified country for most of the European history. There were still different fiefdoms among themselves. But still, even today, the African countries are still struggling to get out of the colonial mentality that these countries have imposed on them. But slowly and surely, they're beginning to see that when they work with China, it's a different set of ground rules, and it's never any longer just the one thing uh, to 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 just continue to let the Western powers take what is worth, and uh, and it's such a totally one-sided thing.
Yeah, I wanted to show our audience something because this is a videotape put out by the BBC, and it's by an anthropologist, a Black anthropologist. I can show you his picture up there, who's British. His name is Dr. Gus Casey Hayford, and he did this video, and he's done a series of these on the history of Black Africa. And Black Africa had ancient kingdoms that were as advanced as any other ancient civilizations of their time. And at one point, the Silk Road, the ancient Silk Road, ran not from China to Europe, it ran from China to ancient Africa, Black Africa.
Yeah.
And that goes back 4,000 years. They found, they found artifacts from China in Africa that date back 4,000 years, and vice versa, things from Africa in China. And this is completely unknown in the West, practically.
Right.
When you hear people in the United States talk about, African American history or Black history, they only talk about from slavery onwards, which is like, not more than 300 or 400 years ago.
Yeah.
But African civilizations actually go back thousands of years. Some of these civilizations started out from primitive times, going back to the tribal level, 40,000 years ago, and then evolving into ancient civilizations, on a par with ancient Rome or ancient Greece or China or any of these other civilizations.
Yeah.
But the West either never knew that or has forgotten that.
I think they
and
have.
Yet, what's happening is
we have all forgotten. It's very, it's just not very often discussed, and certainly not taught in school, about these ancient civilizations. I think what Mali or Timbuktu and some of those places were famous for their culture and civilization, and I think they probably disappeared with time, not necessarily because of white man's incursion, because of slavery and so on came much later, centuries later, I believe, but I'm no expert.
Right, but with the Belt and Road Initiative and the new Silk Road, these civilizations could make a comeback, and these civilizations, like China, are ancient civilizations that survived for many thousands of years, tens of thousands of years in some cases, without destroying their environment the way we're destroying our environment now. So they had some ancient wisdom with them on how to live with nature. And I think, that ancient civilization, that ancient wisdom is something that we need today to learn to balance our civilization and learn to live with the environment and with nature the same way that people did in ancient times.
Yeah, well, you can extend that, Michael, to the Americas. You have the Incas, the Mayans, the Aztecs. They all have certain they've learned certain science and certain engineering, certain principles that allow them to flourish. What they didn't learn, what they didn't have, was how to defend against the aggressiveness of the Spaniards when the Spaniards came. And
Right.
all the Spaniards were interested in was how much gold can they cart off and take back to the old Europe.
Right. And that mentality is what made so many Western civilizations rise to great power, like Greece and Rome and the Byzantines and the ancient, or not even very the ancient, but the colonial powers during the colonial period. But they always follow a rise by a fall. And, like Rome doesn't exist anymore, the Byzantine Empire doesn't exist, the British Empire, upon which the sun never set, no longer is such an empire, although it's now a country. That's good. But China has lasted through 5,000 years, and it's had its ups and downs, but it's still there because they never went to such a great access. And when it comes to the environment, China's now on the leading edge of developing new technology, electric vehicles, alternative energy. It's produced more of them than the rest of the world combined.
Yeah.
It's still making the transition off of coal and others, so it has a ways to go, but it's building a new environmental alternative, and it's creating the possibilities that this technology, once developed, could be used by the rest of the world.
Right.
And China's promoting this multipolar world view that if the whole world could work together, humanity could have a bright future. But if we follow the zero-sum game, we could end up destroying ourselves in a nuclear war.
Yeah. Yeah. I would like to bring up two points that we haven't talked about.
Go ahead.
The current congressional committee called Economic and Security Review, which is a China-directed congressional committee, recently had a hearing, and in the hearing, different witnesses basically said China's economy is slowing down, and it's going through a rough period. So one of the members of Congress will say, "Well, how?" Literally, he said, "Well, while they're down, how do we kick them and make it worse for them?" Well, he is overlooking something, which is China is such an important part of the global economy. If at this point they catch a cold, the whole world is going to feel the pain. So that's point number one. Point number two, I am not so sure that China is going to be irrevocably damaged by the economic slowdown, for the simple reason that they have a lot of built-in resilience in their economy. By being the manufacturing powerhouse, where they're making everything and they can make it at a high quality, at a low price, the whole world needs that. And because the whole world needs what they're making, they're never going to be going out of business. So that's one thing. Secondly, China is actually leading in the use of automation. So there's frequently the talk, oh, China is getting older, the population is getting older. They're going to have fewer and fewer young people to do the jobs. But in point of fact, China's automation is just totally mind-blowing, amazing. Not only in construction engineering, as I had mentioned, but in manufacturing, in in AI intelligence, and so on. So they have a lot of room to grow, to improve their efficiency, to improve their productivity. So they're going to recover. And even in the short term, most people believe that the Chinese economy will still grow at a rate slightly to significantly higher than the US economy will grow. So I think expecting the Chinese economy to tank is probably overly optimistic or pessimistic, depending on your point of view. So that's one point. The second point, which is very interesting, and I just happened to caught on on a Bloomberg Business Week article. Biden has been talking about friendshoring, bring back manufacturing to the U.S. And he's trying to lure manufacturing back. Well, one of the interesting return manufacturing to the U.S. is the gun manufacturers from Europe, the Berettas, the Glock, and these are all European gun makers. They're all building manufacturing base in the U.S. now. Why are they doing that? Well, it turns out export of arms from U.S. is much easier, paperwork-wise, logistic-wise, from the U.S. than it is from Europe. The paperwork is much more onerous and more indirect. And where do these guns go? A lot of the guns are going to Guatemala. Guatemala is such an unsafe place because of all the violence there. And what happens when you have all that violence in Guatemala? You have refugees streaming north trying to get into the U.S. So it's a cycle that we are creating, that we are now having to face. It's a vicious cycle that's just going to spiral and spiral, and it's all because of our love for gun. The gun culture in the U.S. is another way of damaging our own interest.
Well, that's a perfect example of what goes around comes around.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't think of any other questions. Do you have any other points that you would like to make?
Well, I think the only way I would like to summarize, and I can't emphasize this enough for the American public, is that I lived all my life in the U.S. I came over as an 11-year-old kid in 49. I had the greatest, best of this world in the 50s and 60s. I thought this country was so great. It was the country of opportunity. If you study hard, you work hard, you're gonna do fine. Well, I don't see that anymore. I think the rules have totally changed now. And we have a situation where our kids, when they don't want to do manufacturing, they don't want to get jobs in manufacturing. They want to go to Walton, go to MBA, and go to work in the investment banking. And that seems to be the only way to success in this country. And that's hurting us. And I hope that the American public will see it's not in our interest to trying to suppress and spend all our energy to look for adversaries and boogeymen, to create them so that we continue to increase our military budget. We're almost up to $1 trillion a year now in arms and military, and why? What for? Other than the fact that the military industrial complex is doing very well if you're in the Wall Street investing in them. But we have to think about what's going to be in our long-term national interest. And we have to have leaders in this country that is willing to tell the truth. and to let the American people know we're going down the wrong path and it's a path to disaster. So, Michael, thank you for this conversation. Hopefully, we can do some good.
Okay, thank you. And I hope to have you on again. I think that you have some very important things to say.
I welcome the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, folks, we'll end there.
Thank you.
Oops, let's see.
I hope you recorded. You did record it.
I did record. I'm trying to oh, here we go.
The button's still on.
Oops.